Hello everyone. In this video, I'm going to show you how you can use GPT to challenge ChatGPT so that you can make your conversation with it more interesting, more diverse, and also have GPT cover the parts that it wouldn't have covered otherwise. We will be using for that text network visualization tool Infranodus that visualizes your discourse as a graph, and it's very useful for this purpose because Infranodus can show you the gaps inside your discourse, and then you can feed those gaps to GPT, asking it to generate interesting questions that would connect those gaps in some way, and then you could feed those questions to ChatGPT to make it answer them and to develop your discourse further in an interesting way. Another approach that we'll be using that the graph visualization is also very useful for is to focus on the periphery of the discourse. So for example, here we have the periphery, and asking ChatGPT to develop the ideas at the periphery in an interesting way so we can go beyond the boundaries of the ideas that we have. So structural gaps and periphery. If you're interested how it works, keep watching to learn more. I will also record another video where I will explain it in more detail, but here we'll just go through a quick overview. So first of all, you need to open the apps, and then inside Infranodus you have the GPT chat mode. So you choose that, and then you can start talking to GPT 3.5 or GPT-4 model. GPT-4 is slower, so I'm just going to use GPT 3.5, and let's talk about bias. So as you can see, when I type something in, the words are visualized as the nodes, and the co-occurrences of them are the connections on the graph. Then when I receive a response from ChatGPT, the response is also visualized, and then I can have a direct visual feedback on the conversation and quickly see what are the main ideas, how they connect, what are the gaps, and what is the periphery of those ideas. Okay, so then I have the response here. It tells me what bias is. I will ask it to elaborate on this a little bit more. Then it's going to generate more content. It's going to be visualized. And gradually, as I go along, I'm just going to do please elaborate a few times just to show you the general workflow so you understand how it works. Once you gather some content, you will see that some ideas tend to come up more than others. So as you can see, it's talking a lot about bias of information. Also something here on informed decisions. I can click on those nodes and see in which context or what was the answer that mentioned those. But basically, I can already see that there is a gap between this cluster of ideas, making decisions, decision making, and critical informed decision making, and information bias, and also belief, right? So the graph already shows me what are the gaps. I can also use GPT-3 to generate the names for the topics in the responses to have a better understanding of what it's about. So I can see that it was talking about decision making, confirmation bias, anchoring information bias, weighting. Now let's focus on the gaps. So I can go into the gaps, and then I can ask Infranodus to highlight the gaps in this discourse and maybe show me some topics that I could connect in an interesting way. So for example, decision making and bias weighting. As you can see, ChatGPT talked about these two topics, but it didn't really talk about them in the same context. So this is what Infranodus does. It identifies the gap between them, and then what you can do is to generate a question using GPT-3 that would link those two topics together. So already this question would provide you a really interesting idea of how you can connect those ideas. But instead of answering it ourselves, we will simply save it into the graph, and that will go as input to ChatGPT. So this is how we're challenging ChatGPT, by asking it to generate responses to the questions that were generated by GPT-3. And here it's saying, it's giving us an answer on how to become aware of unconscious biases and so on. So also how we can practice diverse viewpoints as well. So here, as you can see, it's really good because it just identified the gap and it answered its own question. When you use it on its own, it's probably going to focus more on the main topics like bias information. Here and not go into the periphery too much. So once again, we can generate another gap here on on overcoming limitations and information. Again, generate a question. It's going to come up with a question using GPT-3. It's using Text DaVinci 003 model, which is quite good for that. And then once it comes up with a question, we can feed it to ChatGPT, and then ChatGPT will try to answer it. So the model is talking to itself, but in a way where we are steering it to bridge the gaps between the ideas which it's generating. And by the way, here you have a measure of how diverse this discourse is, and if it reaches the optimal state, it means that there are several topics inside this discourse which are more or less equally represented, and that they have more or less equal influence also. So this is how you would approach this. Then let's say you want to develop an idea at the periphery of this discourse, right? So for instance, here, I'm just going to actually reload this and then zoom in a little bit more. So for example, here I see an interesting cluster on communication, respect, individual, and maybe something here on diverse perspectives. As you can see, these were some nodes at the periphery of this discourse, and I want to develop them further. So I just select them on the graph. They're automatically copied into my input panel here, and then I click Save. And what's going to happen is that GPT 3.5 will generate some interesting concept that will help us develop this, and it's highlighted here. You see, we're developing beyond the periphery of this discourse now with these ideas. And I can choose more and for example, develop it even further. So as you can see, you can also grow the ideas in the graph by just selecting them and having ChatGPT developing the thought beyond the boundaries that it currently has. So this is a really interesting approach. I encourage you to try it out with your own conversation. It's also a great tool to visualize how ideas form and how they evolve. And if you do that with ChatGPT, you can later do it with your own writing, notes, ideas, dreams, thoughts. You can do it for your own self-developmental purposes, or for marketing research as well, for scientific research, and so on. So this is a really great tool to also visualize a thinking process and see how you can enhance it by bridging the gaps and by developing the periphery of your thought and going beyond the boundaries of your ideas. Try it out on infranodos.com, and if you have any questions, please let me know. Thank you.